The mist rolled in from the sea, engulfing the small coastal village of Minamatata in a ghostly embrace. It was 1961, a time when Japan was rapidly evolving, modernizing, and industrializing. But in this forgotten corner of Kyushu Island, time moved to a different rhythm. The traditions of old clung to the wooden houses as tightly as barnacles to a ship's hull. Superstitions were passed along between neighbors as casually as greetings. Welcome to the Ghastly Journal. I'm your narrator, and tonight I bring you the tale of the Nakamura twins, Akira and Akio. Identical in every way, mirror images of each other. They came to believe that they were not two distinct individuals, but rather a single soul inhabiting two separate bodies. Their story will challenge everything you think you know about identity, connection, and the boundaries of human consciousness. But before we begin, let me remind you that what follows is purely a work of fiction. The characters and events you'll encounter exist only in the realm of imagination, crafted to delve into the darker corners of human psychology and belief. Our story begins on a night much like this one, shrouded in mist, pregnant with the weight of unspoken possibilities. The Nakamura family resided in a traditional house on the outskirts of Minamata, where the mountains met the sea. Hiroshi Nakamura, a fisherman weathered by the salt and sun, had hands worn and creased from years of hauling nets and ropes. His wife Yuko was well known in the village for her quiet strength and her vast knowledge of old remedies, herbs, potions, and incantations that seemed to heal what modern medicine could not. When Yuko announced her pregnancy, the village rejoiced. But when her belly grew large enough to suggest twins, the older villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Twins were rare in their lineage, and in the old ways they were seen as an omen, sometimes of prosperity, but more often as a warning of something strange, something unsettling that couldn't quite be named. On a stormy night in April 1961, as thunder cracked over the bay and fishing boats strained against their moorings, Yuko gave birth to identical twin boys. The midwife, old Mrs. Tanaka, noticed something peculiar right away, but kept silent until the babies were cleaned and swaddled. "Look," she whispered to Hiroshi, who stood nervously by. "They are mirror twins, indeed." While the boys looked identical in every way, there were subtle differences that set them apart. Akira, the firstborn, was right-handed, while Akio, born 7 minutes later, favored his left hand. Akira had a small birthmark behind his right ear, and Akio's matching mark appeared behind his left. Even their hair swirled in opposite directions from their crowns. "It's rare," Mrs. Tanaka said. "In the old days, we'd say their souls were split at birth. One soul that became two, or perhaps two souls that longed to be one." Hiroshi dismissed this as superstition, but Yuko couldn't shake the midwife's words. She watched her boys with cautious eyes, pondering the mystery as they grew. For the first few years, the twins were like any other healthy, curious children. They delighted the village with their matching faces and opposite personalities. But as they neared their third birthday, Yuko began to notice strange behaviors. The twins would often mirror each other's movements without looking as if their actions were choreographed. When Akira scraped his knee, Akio would cry out in pain, clutching his own uninjured knee. They even developed their own language, a complicated system of sounds and gestures that only they understood. This wasn't unusual for twins, the local doctor assured the parents. But there was something about the intensity of their bond that unsettled those who witnessed it. By the time they were 5, the twins insisted on dressing identically, yet in reverse. If Akira buttoned his jacket from right to left, as was traditional for boys, Akio would insist on doing the opposite, buttoning his jacket left to right. They would stand before mirrors for hours, fascinated by how their reflections seemed to defy the pattern of their mirrored existence. At this point, the twins first began to speak of being the same person. "We are not two," they would say in unison, their voices blending into an eerie harmony. "We are one split in half." Their parents tried to dismiss this talk, concerned about the mystical implications in an era of scientific progress. Hiroshi, in particular, worried about how his sons would fit into society. But the more they tried to separate the twins, the more fiercely they clung to their shared identity. At the age of 7, a new doctor came to Minamata. Dr. Yoshida, young and educated in Tokyo, brought with him modern ideas about psychology and child development. Concerned about the twins' increasingly intense bond, Hiroshi and Yuko took them to see him. Dr. Yoshida was intrigued by the Nakamura twins. He had read Western literature on identical twins and their unique psychological development. But the mirror aspect added an unexpected layer to the phenomenon. He began meeting with the boys weekly, sometimes together, sometimes separately, taking careful notes about their behaviors and beliefs. "The bond between identical twins is naturally strong," Dr. Yoshida explained to the parents after several sessions. "They not only share genes, but prenatal experiences. Mirror twins, however, are even rarer. They essentially develop as reflections of each other. It's not surprising they've developed this mythology about themselves. But is it healthy?" Yukio asked, voicing the concern that had been growing in her heart. Dr. Yoshida hesitated. "I believe we should gently guide them toward a more conventional understanding of their separate identities. Perhaps we should start by separating them, more different classes at school, different activities." And so began a concerted effort to help the twins develop as individuals. They were placed in separate classrooms, and Hiroshi took Akira fishing while Yuko taught Akio to help her in the garden. They were given different clothes, different toys. But the twins responded with increasing distress. They became withdrawn, their academic performance faltering, and they developed strange physical symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, night terrors, symptoms that seemed to strike them simultaneously, even when they were apart. Most disturbing of all was their insistence that they could feel each other's physical sensations and emotions from a distance. If Akira was scolded at school, Akio would come home crying, able to recount the exact details of the incident. If Akio cut his finger while helping his mother in the kitchen, Akira would suddenly wake up and check his own finger, even though he was nowhere near the house. By their 10th birthday, the twins had developed an elaborate belief system about their condition. They told Dr. Yoshida that they weren't truly twins at all, but a single person whose soul had been divided between two bodies. "In the spirit world, we are one," Akio explained during a session as Dr. Yoshida recorded it all on an old tape recorder. "But here we were, split apart at birth." Akira continued, his voice carrying an eerie calm. "That's why we feel what the other feels, and know what the other knows," Akio added in perfect unison. Dr. Yoshida, ever the rational observer, asked with a gentle concern, "But what happens when you grow up? Will you always need to be together?" The twins exchanged a long, profound glance, their identical brown eyes locking in a way that seemed as if they could see straight through each other. "We will become one again," they said, their voices melding into an unsettling harmony. Dr. Yoshida's journal entry that night reflected his growing concern. What had initially seemed like an unusual bond between the twins was now shifting into something more troubling, something beyond his professional understanding. Their delusion, as he had come to view it, wasn't lessening. It was becoming more ingrained. Despite his attempts to foster their independence, they were retreating further into their shared identity. His recommendation was clear. More aggressive intervention was necessary. In an effort to separate them completely, it was decided that the twins would spend a month apart. Aki would stay with their maternal grandmother in a nearby village, while Akira remained at home. The hope was that this complete separation would weaken the bond and help them develop as individuals. But the separation proved traumatic from the very start. Both boys became physically ill, developing high fevers and delirium. More disturbingly, they shared identical hallucinations. Visions of dark, submerged water, a village lost beneath the surface, and ghostly twins reaching for each other across an impassable barrier. After just 3 days, Yukio, unable to bear the suffering of her children, insisted on reuniting them, despite Dr. Yoshida's advice. As soon as the twins were together again, their fevers broke and they clung to one another, speaking in their private language for hours. Dr. Yoshida, though disturbed, couldn't help but be fascinated by their connection. He delved deeper into the study of twins, with exceptionally strong psychic connections, finding some scattered reports in medical literature. But nothing that matched the depth and intensity of the bond he was witnessing with the Nakamura boys. Meanwhile, in Minamata, the situation was deteriorating. Industrial pollution had been leaching into the bay for years, poisoning the fish that the villagers relied on for sustenance. Strange illnesses were beginning to surface: tremors, vision problems, and loss of coordination. The government had just started an investigation, but the villagers were already in a state of panic. Against this backdrop of growing fear, the twins' behavior took another unsettling turn. Now 11 years old, they began speaking of shared dreams, nightmares of poisoned waters and deformed spirits. The twins claimed these spirits were trying to communicate with them, warning the village through them. The spirits are angry because they've been split apart, Akira explained to his increasingly concerned mother. Like us. They were one with the water, the fish, and the people, Akio added. But now, they're broken and separated. The twins began drawing disturbing images, identical pictures created simultaneously, even when they were in different rooms. The drawings depicted grotesque human figures emerging from dark water, their limbs twisted and their faces melting like reflections distorted by rippling pools. Dr. Yoshida, though attempting to rationalize their behavior as a response to the community's anxiety over pollution, found himself deeply unsettled. There were aspects of their shared consciousness that he simply couldn't explain through conventional psychology. As the twins neared their 12th birthday, their obsession with mirrors grew. They began collecting mirrors and arranging them in complex patterns in their room, spending hours staring into them, engaging in whispered conversations with their reflections that they refused to explain to their parents. One day, Hiroshi returned from fishing to find his sons sitting perfectly still, facing each other with a small hand mirror between them, positioned so each could see the other's reflection, not their own. The twins didn't respond to Hiroshi's voice or touch. Their eyes were open, but they seemed unseeing. Their breathing was so slow that at first Hiroshi feared they weren't breathing at all. It took hours to break them from this trance-like state, and when they finally regained awareness, they were confused and disoriented, unable to explain what had happened. The incident frightened their parents enough that they decided to remove all mirrors from the house. That night, the twins slept peacefully for the first time in months. But when Yukio went to wake them the next morning, she found their beds empty. Panic quickly spread throughout the household, then the neighborhood, and soon the entire village. A search party was organized. The twins were found by dusk, standing hand in hand at the edge of the bay, the polluted water lapping at their feet. Though unharmed, they appeared dazed and spoke only to each other in their private language. When Dr. Yoshida arrived, the twins finally spoke in Japanese, saying simply, we found the way back to one. Alarmed by their increasingly detached behavior, Dr. Yoshida recommended they be taken to a specialized psychiatric hospital in Tokyo. Modern psychiatry, he suggested, might provide the treatment needed to help them develop healthier, separate identities. Hiroshi and Yukio were reluctant. Taking the twins to Tokyo would mean admitting that their condition was beyond the help of local medicine and traditional remedies. It would expose their family's struggles to outsiders. But their fear for their son's well-being ultimately outweighed these concerns, and arrangements were made for the twins to be admitted to a prestigious hospital in the capital. The night before their departure, a violent storm swept in from the sea. The wind howled and rain lashed the village. Amid the chaos of preparing for the journey and securing the house against the storm, Hiroshi and Yukio didn't notice that the twins had slipped away once again. This time they had taken something with them. An antique mirror that had belonged to Yukio's grandmother, said to be blessed by a Shinto priest to show not just reflections, but glimpses of the spirit world. The mirror had been locked away since the incident by the bay, but somehow the twins had found it. The search party found no trace of the boys that night. As dawn broke and the storm subsided, leaving the village drenched and strewn with debris, the search expanded. Police were called from a neighboring town, and for 3 days, every building boat and cave along the shoreline was examined. On the 4th day, a fisherman spotted something unusual in a tidal pool at the base of the cliffs outside the village. The antique mirror, strangely undamaged, rested on a flat rock as though it had been carefully placed there. But of the twins, there was no sign. The official search was called off after 2 weeks, with the police report listing the Nakamura twins as presumed drowned, their bodies likely carried out to sea by the strong currents. Hiroshi continued searching for months, taking his boat out daily to scour the coastline, while Yukio consulted psychics and traditional healers, desperate for any news about her sons. Dr. Yoshida, troubled by the case and his inability to help, left Minamata shortly after the twins' disappearance to take a position at a research hospital in Osaka. Before leaving, he gave his case notes and recordings to Yukio, telling her that perhaps one day they might provide some insight into what had happened. Years passed, and the truth about the industrial pollution in Minamata Bay finally emerged. The mercury poisoning from contaminated fish became known worldwide as Minamata disease. The village began to change, with many residents relocating and new people moving in as the area slowly recovered. Hiroshi and Yukio remained growing older in their house by the sea. But the memory of their sons and the mystery of the Nakamura twins never faded. Never giving up hope that their sons might somehow return, Yukio and Hiroshi kept the boys' room exactly as it had been. Dust gathered on the paired desks, the same desks where the twins had once drawn their mirrored pictures. In 1972, 11 years after their disappearance, a young anthropologist named Kenji Tanaka arrived in Minamata to document the cultural impact of the industrial disaster. During interviews with elderly residents about traditional beliefs and their intersection with the modern tragedy, Tanaka heard whispered stories about the mirror twins who had vanished during the storm. Intrigued, Tanaka sought out the Nakamura family. Hiroshi had died the previous winter, but Yukio, now in her 60s, still lived in the old house. Her mind remained sharp, and she was willing to share her story. She showed Tanaka her son's drawings, played him the scratchy recordings from Dr. Yoshida's sessions, and finally, after some hesitation, told him about the strange occurrences that had followed the twins' disappearance. Sometimes when I look in a mirror too long, she confided, I see them not as they were, but as they would be now. Young men still identical, still mirrored. They're trying to tell me something, but I can't understand them without the proper mirror. Tanaka, skeptical yet fascinated, asked about the antique mirror found at the tidal pool. "It was returned to me," Yukio said, "but it changed. The glass darkened, and sometimes it doesn't show reflections at all, only darkness. I keep it covered now." Despite his academic skepticism, Tanaka asked to see the mirror. Yukio led him to a small room at the back of the house, where the mirror hung covered with a piece of indigo cloth. With trembling hands, Yukio removed the covering. The mirror was unusually large for a Japanese household item of its era, nearly a meter tall, set in an ornate wooden frame carved with waves and sea creatures. The glass had indeed darkened as though tarnished, but in a peculiar way that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "It's quite beautiful," Tanaka said, stepping closer. "May I?" Yukio nodded, and Tanaka leaned in to examine the craftsmanship of the frame. As he did, he caught a flicker of movement in the glass, an unsettling ripple, like water disturbed by something moving beneath its surface. He jerked back, convincing himself it was just a trick of the light. But then he saw it again. Faces began to form briefly in the darkness of the mirror. Identical young men with serious eyes, their features almost, but not quite those of the twins from the photographs Yukio had shown him. They appeared to be underwater, reaching toward the glass from within. Tanaka stumbled backward, his academic detachment shattered. Yukio showed no surprise at his reaction. "They're still trying to become one," she said quietly. "They haven't found the way yet." Shaken, Tanaka cut his research trip short and returned to Tokyo, taking with him copies of Dr. Yoshida's notes and recordings. He intended to write about the case from a folkloric perspective, exploring how traditional beliefs about twins and spirits had influenced the community's understanding of the tragedy. But each time he attempted to work on the manuscript, he found himself disturbed by inexplicable phenomena. His own reflections seeming to move independently, water inexplicably pooling under the windows of his apartment during dry weather, and vivid dreams of drowning that left him gasping for air. After several months, Tanaka locked away his research notes and never returned to the project. He went on to have a distinguished academic career focusing on industrial anthropology, but he never again ventured into research involving folk beliefs or supernatural elements. When colleagues occasionally asked about his aborted Minamata project, he would quickly change the subject. In 1981, 20 years after the disappearance of the Nakamura twins, a new development brought the old mystery back into focus. A construction project on the outskirts of Minamata uncovered a previously unknown cave system that extended from the cliffs down to the sea. Inside, workers found evidence of habitation candles, food wrappers dating back to the 1960s, and most disturbingly, the walls were covered with thousands of drawings. The drawings were identical pairs images, duplicated side by side, depicting twin figures progressively merging into one. The final images, nearest the underwater entrance to the cave, showed a single figure emerging from what appeared to be a mirror. News of the discovery reached Yukio Nakamura, now in her 70s, and living in a care home, her mind increasingly lost to dementia. Upon hearing about the cave, she experienced a rare moment of lucidity and insisted on being taken to see it. Against her doctor's advice, a sympathetic nurse arranged the visit. As Yukio stood in the cave, leaning heavily on her cane, she studied the drawings in silence. Then, to the surprise of those accompanying her, she began speaking as if to someone only she could see. "You found the way," she said, tears streaming down her lined face. "You're together now, aren't you? One soul again, as you always believed." She reached out to touch one of the final drawings, the single figure emerging from the mirror, and then collapsed. She died 3 days later in the hospital, never regaining consciousness. The cave became a local legend, sparking various theories about its connection to the long-missing Nakamura twins. Some believed the boys had hidden there after running away, creating the drawings in a psychological fugue state before ultimately drowning while trying to swim out through the underwater passage. Others suggested more supernatural explanations, linking the twins' disappearance to ancient folklore about spirit portals and the liminality of mirrors. The case might have remained nothing more than a regional curiosity, if not for a documentary filmmaker named Hana Ishiawa, who stumbled upon references to the Nakamura twins while researching the cultural aftermath of the Minamata disaster for a film project in 1991. 30 years after the events, Ishiawa tracked down Dr. Yoshida, now retired and in his 80s, living quietly in Kyoto. Initially reluctant to revisit what he called the greatest failure of my professional life, Dr. Yoshida eventually agreed to an interview after Ishiawa showed him photographs of the cave drawings. I always approached their case from a Western psychological perspective. Dr. Yoshida admitted his hands trembling slightly as he examined the photographs Ishiawa had brought. I viewed their belief in being one soul as a delusion that needed curing. But what if they understood something about themselves that our science couldn't explain? He handed Ishiawa journals he had kept in the years following his departure from Minamata. Detailed accounts of dreams where he saw the twins swimming through dark water moving toward a light that seemed to be both a mirror and a doorway. In the dreams, they're always trying to explain something to me, he said softly. But I can't hear them properly underwater. They point to their reflections, then to each other, then to something beyond the mirror that I can't see. They want me to understand what they've discovered. Intrigued by this new perspective, Ishiawa expanded her research. She sought out Kenji Tanaka, now a professor emeritus at Tokyo University. Though Tanaka refused an on-camera interview, he agreed to meet privately over tea in his book-lined office. Finally, Tanaka shared the experience that had caused him to abandon his research decades earlier. After I saw whatever it was I saw in that mirror, he confessed, his academic composure cracking. I began noticing something when I looked at my own reflection. Just glimpses, mind you, easily dismissed. But sometimes it seemed like my reflection's eyes would look directly at me with an awareness separate from my own, as if something else was looking out from inside the mirror. He leaned forward, lowering his voice despite them being alone. I believe the Nakamura twins found something. A way of perceiving reality that most of us can't access. Their insistence that they were one soul in two bodies wasn't a childish fantasy or a psychological abnormality. It was an insight into what Ishiawa asked. Tanaka hesitated, then sighed. Into the nature of consciousness, perhaps? Or the permeability of the boundaries we assume exist between separate minds? He rubbed his temples. I know how this sounds. I've spent 40 years trying to rationalize what I experienced. But sometimes I think those twins were right. Not just about themselves, but about all of us. What do you mean? Ishiawa pressed. Maybe we're all fragments of something larger, separated only by the limitations of physical form. Maybe what those boys experienced as a literal connection is something the rest of us feel only as a vague intuition. That consciousness isn't as individual as we believe. As Ishiawa's documentary project progressed, her focus gradually shifted from the Minamata disaster to the story of the Nakamura twins. She visited the cave, now partially closed for safety reasons, but still accessible with special permission. She interviewed elderly villagers who remembered the twins' former classmates and the fishermen who had found the mirror. The mirror itself proved elusive. After Yukio's death, her few possessions had been dispersed among distant relatives, and the antique mirror had apparently been sold to a collector whose identity remained unknown, despite Ishiawa's best efforts to track it down. As her research continued, Ishiawa began to experience strange phenomena of her own, particularly related to mirrors and reflective surfaces. Twice while filming B-roll footage of Minamata Bay, her camera captured inexplicable reflections on the water's surface. Two young men standing behind her, visible in the water, but not on the shore where she stood. When she turned, there was no one there, and the reflections vanished. More unsettling were the dreams that began plaguing her. Vivid nightmares of being underwater, looking up at the surface where two identical faces gazed down at her, their features distorted by the water, but their eyes clear and purposeful. In the dreams, she understood they were trying to show her something, but she always woke before she could grasp what it was. Despite these disturbing experiences, or perhaps because of them, Ishiawa became even more determined to understand what had happened to the Nakamura twins. She consulted experts in various fields, psychiatrists specializing in twin studies, folklorists familiar with Japanese beliefs about mirrors as spiritual portals, and even quantum physicists whose work touched on theories of consciousness and observer effects. One physicist, Dr. Mio Ko, found the case particularly intriguing from a theoretical perspective. Quantum entanglement suggests that particles once connected remain connected, instantaneously affecting each other. Regardless of distance, he explained during an interview for the documentary. We observe this with particles, but consciousness remains poorly understood from a quantum perspective. If consciousness has quantum properties, could the unusual connection between identical twins who develop from a single cell represent a macro-level form of entanglement? Dr. Ko cautioned that this was speculative far beyond current scientific understanding, but the parallel was suggestive. The Nakamura twins' belief that they were one consciousness experiencing reality through two separate physical forms isn't entirely incompatible with some very theoretical quantum approaches to consciousness, he concluded. As Ishiawa's documentary neared completion in early 1992, she made a final trip to Minamata to film concluding segments at locations central to the twin story. On her last evening there, she visited the tidal pool where the mirror had been found 30 years earlier. The sun was setting, turning the water to rippling gold and orange. As she stood contemplating the case that had consumed over a year of her life, she noticed something unusual in the water, a perfect reflection of the twilight sky, but with two dark figures standing at its center. Her heart raced and she looked up, but there was no one on the cliff above her to cast such reflections. When she looked back at the water, the figures seemed closer, more distinct, two young men in their early 30s, identical but mirrored, dressed in clothes that might have been fashionable in the 1960s. They were looking directly up at her from beneath the surface, their expression solemn but not frightening. Ishiawa found herself unable to move, transfixed by the impossible reflection. As she watched the two figures slowly turn toward each other, they reached out their hands, meeting in the middle of the reflection. Where they touched, their forms began to blur together, the boundaries between them dissolving until for just a moment she saw a single figure where two had been. Then the water rippled, disturbed by a sudden breeze, and when it settled, the reflection showed only the darkening sky. Shaken but also strangely elated, as if she had been given a rare gift, Ishiawa completed her documentary. The film, titled The Mirror Twins, Two Bodies, One Soul, premiered at a small film festival in Tokyo in late 1992. It received positive reviews for its atmospheric storytelling and its respectful exploration of both scientific and supernatural perspectives. But Ishiawa's documentary, The Mirror Twins, never achieved mainstream distribution. What most viewers didn't know, however, was that Ishiawa had created two versions of the film's ending. The version shown publicly concluded with thoughtful commentary from Dr. Kato and other experts on the mystery of consciousness and connection, leaving the audience to draw their own conclusions about what had happened to the Nakamura twins. But there was another version, one she showed only to Dr. Yoshida and Professor Tanaka at a private screening. This alternate ending included footage of the tidal pool at sunset, capturing the impossible reflection she had witnessed firsthand. The footage was unclear, wavering with the movement of the water, but distinct enough to show two figures becoming one before the surface rippled and the image disappeared. Both men watched in silence. When the screen went dark, Dr. Yoshida was weeping quietly. "They found their way back," he whispered. "They completed their journey." Professor Tanaka simply nodded. Beyond words, Ishiawa never showed this footage to anyone else. And after Dr. Yoshida's death in 1994, she decided to destroy it. But before doing so, a strange compulsion led her to film her own reflection in a mirror while holding the videotape. When she watched this recording afterward, she was unsurprised to see subtle movements in her reflection that she hadn't made. Her reflected self nodded slightly, as if in approval, before the image stabilized, showing only her true movements again. The original tape containing the tidal pool footage was never found among her possessions. In her journal, her final entry on the subject simply read, "Some truths exist only in reflections visible from one side, but not the other." The twins knew this. Now, perhaps so do I. 30 years have passed since Ishiawa's documentary. The story of the Nakamura twins has become a footnote in discussions of the Minamata disaster, occasionally referenced in parapsychological literature or quantum consciousness theory, but largely forgotten by the wider world. However, in Minamata itself, now recovered and redeveloped, the stories persist. Fishermen sometimes report seeing two identical young men standing on the shore at dawn, visible only as reflections in the water. Visitors to the cave, now a minor tourist attraction, occasionally claim their reflections in puddles on the cave floor. Momentarily show different faces, twin young men with serious eyes, seemingly trying to communicate something important. Most notably, a local phenomenon has emerged that remains unexplained despite investigation by meteorologists and geologists. Twice a year, on the spring and autumn equinoxes, the tidal pool where the mirror was found displays unusual reflective properties. For approximately 20 minutes at sunset, the water becomes completely still, regardless of weather conditions, reflecting the sky and surrounding cliffs with mirror-like perfection. Photographers and tourists often gather to witness this phenomenon. In their pictures, the boundary between reality and reflection becomes indistinguishable, the real world, and its mirror image forming a perfect whole with no clear line dividing where one ends and the other begins. Local tradition now holds that during these moments, the barrier between worlds thins, and it becomes possible to glimpse truths normally hidden from human perception. Some claim to have seen their reflections move independently, or to have briefly perceived themselves not as separate individuals, but as connected parts of a larger consciousness. Scientists offer various explanations involving unique geological features, unusual tidal patterns, and specific atmospheric conditions, but those who have experienced the phenomenon firsthand often come away changed, more attuned to the subtle connections between themselves and others, more aware of the permeable nature of the boundaries we perceive as solid. As for the Nakamura twins, Akira and Akio, their ultimate fate remains unknown. Did they drown that stormy night in 1961? Their bodies carried out to sea? Did they live for a time in the hidden cave before some tragic end? Or did they, as their mother believed in her final moments of lucidity, find the way to become one again, crossing some threshold that exists only in reflection? Perhaps all these stories, the scientific explanations, the folklore, the eyewitness accounts, are themselves reflections of a truth too complex for any single perspective to capture completely. Like mirror twins, they are different, yet the same, separate yet connected, each containing elements of truth viewed from different angles. What remains clear is the profound impact of two children who challenged our understanding of identity and consciousness. They believed with unshakable conviction that they were not two separate beings, but a single soul experiencing reality through two physical forms. Their story continues to raise questions about the nature of connection, the boundaries of self, and the possibility that our perception of reality as solid and separate is merely a reflection on troubled waters, distorting a deeper unity that lies beneath. As I conclude this episode of the Ghastly Journal, I invite you to consider your own reflection the next time you stand before a mirror. Look carefully into your own eyes and ask yourself, is that truly you looking back? Or is there something more complex happening in that moment of recognition? Are you seeing yourself? Or are you seeing the reflection of something larger, of which you are just one manifestation? The Nakamura twins believed they knew the answer. Perhaps in their own way, they were trying to show us a truth we've forgotten. That the boundaries between us are more permeable than we realize. That consciousness flows between and beyond our physical forms, like water finding its level. And perhaps somewhere beyond the mirror, there's still a waiting truth for us to understand. This has been the Ghastly Journal. Until next time, remember, every reflection contains two worlds, and the line between them may be thinner than you think.